Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Quorum Podcast. This is where academic medicine meets remote, austere, and resource-limited areas.
Welcome back to the program. This is Aebhric O'Kelly. This week, we are with Dr. Peter Anders Christiansen, also known as PAC, who was instrumental in the design and launch of the Nordic Special Operations Combat Medic course. PAC, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you so much, Aebhric. It's been a long time since I've seen you, and it's enjoyable to listen to your beautiful voice again.
So tell us about yourself and what's keeping you busy.
Right. Aebhric, I was a senior medical officer in the Danish Special Forces way back in 2000, started in 2010, and I went on a military pension 9 years ago. But since then, I've been working with the NATO, with the University of College Cork as an educator, and I'm doing certain other things with them at this point. I am also working in my own clinic in Denmark, using a Stellate Ganglion Block for PTSD veterans. So and I'm 69 years old now, and still going strong, mate.
Before we jump into the whole NSOCM thing, tell us about your nonprofit. So you were doing PTSD work in Denmark.
Yes, U.S. has been on the forefront of the whole we call it Stellate Ganglion Block. I'll just call it SGB. SGB has been used now 10, 15 years on veterans, both active duty and post-service. SGB is remarkably effective to treat the hyperarousal part of PTSD. It works actually 3 to 6 months, where the hyperarousal element is more or less removed. So these poor guys, they can get cognitive therapy at the same time. So what the U.S. is on the forefront, as I said, doing a lot of research. There's a lot of level 1 research going on now in different universities. But Denmark and most of Europe actually knows nothing about it. So I had 2 goals, of course, through my network, treating my own veterans, but also trying to get SGB recognized as an indication for PTSD. Just remember, SGB has been used 100 years for all kinds of complex pain syndromes. It's been used for phantom pain, for example, complex regional pain syndromes. So it's a very well-known block. I remember doing my first one in 1986 as a young doctor. But the technique has developed a lot more now using ultrasound. It's much safer. So I opened my own clinic and working together with a fund here in Denmark called Thank You for Your Service, in Danish, Tak for din indsats. And I started in May. Unfortunately, I've had my arm in a plaster of Paris all summer. So it's really getting up and running now. So it's going well.
So is that based on cognitive behavioral therapy?
No, my suggestion is most of our veterans, they've been through the windmill. They've been through cognitive therapy. They've been as post-exposure therapy or metacognitive therapy or EMDR. They've all tried different things. They've been put on drugs. And so a lot of them don't really trust the system as such anymore. So what I always try and get them to do is start out on a fresh therapy session after receiving an SGB with me. And if they don't want to do that, I always, of course, have a family member of someone, a loved one, together with them. But the optimal thing is, of course, having a professional psychotherapist, psychologist, or whatever, working with the patient at the same time.
So where does the ultrasound come in?
Well, to do the block is in the neck, on both sides of the neck with 1 day in between. What you do is you identify the exact spot where you want to place your local anesthetic. Then you, using ultrasound, it's an ultrasound guided technique. You place the needle exactly where you want it, and then you inject. In that way, you don't hit nerves, you don't hit blood vessels, and you have an exact placement of your drug. You do that on 2 levels on the right side, and then the day after 2 levels on the left side. That is the generally accepted way of doing SGB on PTSD nowadays.
So if you're not doing this on nerve, what is it acting on?
Well, what happens is that it is a nerve. It's just like a nerve block. But remember, the local anesthetic only works for 6 hours. But the effect is much, much, much longer lasting. And what happens is that the cervical sympathetic chain, as it's called, it's these special nerves that goes from the brain to the body. The fibers also go from the body to the brain. This is, of course, knocked out with the local anesthetic just for the 3 to 6 hours. And what happens is there's some part of the brain called the amygdala that is kind of reset to 0. The amygdala is part of the reptile brain, the part of the brain that reacts instinctively to danger. So the classic story is one of our poor PTSD veterans is walking along the street, and then there's a crash behind him. Instinctively, the body goes into overdrive. The problem is that many of our PTSD veterans, they are in a constant overdrive situation. And of course, that tires out the brain totally. It gives them bad sleep, makes them irritable. It really breaks up social function, families. It's really, really the worst part of the PTSD is this constant hyperarousal. That's what we do. And people don't really understand why it lasts for such a long time. But it has got something to do, the so-called resetting of the amygdala. That's, of course, very commonly said. But what probably happens is that you affect something called norepinephrine, I think you say, or noradrenaline sprouting in this area. So, yeah, it's amazing. 3 minutes, 5 minutes after the injection, you can see the patient just calms down. We let them lie on our bench for half an hour afterwards. They fall often into a deep sleep. Many people react emotionally because this constant overdrive just disappears. The reason that we do it on the left side the day after is that we know around 10% of our patients have also an effect or even a better effect on the left side. And this has got something to do with the brain and anatomy. So that's what I do right now. And of course, it's a struggle because it's not recognized in Denmark as such. So I can say in Congress right now in the United States, there's a bill being put forward trying to ensure that SGB is offered to all veterans with PTSD. The bill was introduced last autumn, and as far as I can see on congress.gov, that it hasn't really reached any decision yet. But it's exciting for us who use SGB that it's already there.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. FDA did a survey on all kinds of PTSD treatments that came out, I think it was in 2020, 2021, where SGB was actually not really mentioned because, as said, there are hundreds of case stories. And you've got a doctor, we probably all know him, Dr. James Lynch in Maryland, who's got his own clinic, and a doctor called Sean Mulvaney. They're both spec op doctors who have now retired but have opened their own clinic using stellate ganglion blocks. They've done thousands of patients the last 10 years. with exceedingly good results. But what the professional psychology and psychiatry world needs are many more so-called randomized control trials that lead to level 1 evidence. And there's only one as such right now, but that came out in 2023, and FDA at the time did not take that into consideration. It was after they had made their statement. So everyone is waiting what FDA is going to do now, and maybe they will generate a new decision-making on SGB and PTSD. It's not the SGB itself, but it's the indication on PTSD.
So if anyone listening wants to do this, they can come to Denmark and have a chat with you.
They can come to me in Denmark. I've got my own homepage called stellateklinikken.com. I'm on Facebook. They can just write my name. They can write Stellate Ganglion. It's spelled STELLATUM KLINIKKEN. That's Danish for the Stellate Clinic.
So, PAC, we first met in Fullendorf on the NATO NSOCM course, 2017, I think. And you have been instrumental in NSOCM, mainly the Nordic Special Operations Combat Medic course. And it's a bit, there are two NSOCMs. Actually, there's probably more than that in there, but can you give us the deep dive? What is NSOCM? You created the Nordic SOCM with a bunch of other Scandinavians, and now there's the NATO SOCM. So give us a primer on what is the NSOCM.
Okay. When I was employed as a senior medical officer, SOF Denmark, I've been a military officer since 2001, and multiple deployments as an anesthetist, Kandahar, Kosovo, Camp Bastion twice, Kandahar 3 times, South Afghanistan, SOF. So I recognized very quickly that the standard of medic in SOF was not up to date in Denmark. And at the same time, I joined the group down in NSHQ. We had our twice-a-year meeting, and there was a colonel called Dan Irizarry. Dan was exceedingly visionary and very quickly got a process started to define what do the SOF medical leaders want their medics to be able to. And they made a task list of 164 items, which the NATO countries, the medical leaders, all agreed upon would be the basics of the education. Very quickly there in 2011, the Swedes, Norwegians, Finns, and Danes had a really fast-working group that developed a modular-based education of 20 weeks built upon something called smart defense. Smart defense is a term coined by the former General Secretary of NATO, Anders Fogh Larsen, who was actually from Denmark also. And it works like this, that the cost of the module, which the nation is responsible for, is held by the nation. There were around 8 or 9 modules, and they were passed out between the 4 countries. The countries, except, for example, Sweden accepted the 5-week basic science module. Denmark accepted doing pharmacology and operational planning, and so on and so on. And that worked quite well. We held our first course in 2013. So that was a 2-year development. The pilot course, I think, was held in 2012, and the first formal course, 2013. This was, of course, done in tight collaboration with NSHQ. That SOFCOM was called, JMed SOFCOM was called at the time. The history is quite interesting because the Danish Medical Defense Command wasn't really interested in this. So I was so lucky I offered the course to a Nordic organization called Nordefco, Nordic defense cooperation. I offered it and I just asked them, was this an idea for a common Nordic course? And they grabbed it right away, very quickly decided they wanted to do it. So the message was sent to the Danish Medical Command, do it. And the general at the time really didn't know what the hell was going on, excuse my French. So I was called up to on the red carpet in front of his desk and asked very politely, what on earth is going on here? And I just said, well, it's not really my fault because we've just developed a really good product here, and the Nordic Defense Cooperation was very interested. So, well, I just got the go-ahead, and then we did it. We ran a couple of courses in 2014, 15, 16, and in 2015, 16, Juliana, that you know from ISTC, asked me to come down to ISTC and help develop the ISTC NSOC. And the ISTC NSOCM, ISTC is the International Special Training Center based in Fullendorf. This organization is a Minute of Understanding organization consisting now, I think, of 9 countries. They all send their soft medical students to ISTC. They have around 20 seats a year also. And the education is more or less exactly a copy of the Nordics. Of course, with slight changes, but it's a modular course. It's 22 weeks in Germany, and that's how we got to where we are now. They ran the courses, as you said, in 2016, 17, 18, and I think they've run it yearly since then.
There's a hiccup there during COVID, but yeah, they're still at it.
And not during COVID. They shut down during COVID, that's right. But the two educational systems are more or less the same. Right now, as I said, we didn't really have in Europe at the time in 2010, except the major countries, US, Canada, England, France. They had their own soft medic education, but they were not really part of the development of the NSOCM. We call it a NATO SOCM. You were talking about the Nordic NATO SOCM and the ISTC NATO SOCM. That's probably the correct terms to use. Now Germany has joined the family, making something called the German NSOCM. And I know the new brigade stood up in the UK, the Ranger Battalion, want to educate their medics to the same level. So it's going in Europe. I think there are only a couple of countries now that are not running an education like the NSOCM, and I think that's Romania, Bulgaria. Spain and Portugal are talking about it, but Poland has got their own. Poland SOF is quite big, so they're running their own education. So it's been fascinating. It's been very, very interesting.
How difficult would it be to get all of these people, all of these stakeholders in one room to have everyone do the same NSOCM?
Yeah, I know. Well, first of all, I think that everyone had the general feeling that this was just necessary. And when the medical leaders, the soft medical leaders, and the sergeant majors of the medical part, they all had the same vision, then it was quite easy. Remember, it was 4 countries, and we had, I think, 6 meetings the first 2 years, the first 1.5 years, and there were no problems. Everyone turned up. In the Nordics, we were very lucky because we had a very common culture. Even the Finns, even though they go in a lot of saunas, but even the Finns. So we had really good discussions. There were really no problems to develop this. But then what happened was ISTC did their thing. And one of the big problems the first couple of years from 2015 to 2020 was collaboration between the Nordics and ISTC was not efficient enough. And that is because the medical leaders of SOF in the Nordics Well, they were nearly using all their time already on developing and maintaining not only this education, but their jobs. And ISTC, why they didn't collaborate, but they probably reached out. But here the problem was getting everyone together in the same room.
Hmm.
So this is where then NSHQ tried to take over. They were the validating, accrediting body in NATO for the courses, and at least once a year, all the major stakeholders got together in Mutz in Belgium and had a talk about this.
So I can imagine that a lot of these countries have their own idea. Like the Polish Grom Soft probably want their own type of combat medic. And the new Rangers with the UK, they probably want to follow what's happening in Georgia with the American Rangers, and it's like herding cats, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But their Directive 75001 from SOFCOM in NATO, it gives general ideas of what they should be able to do. The whole idea is interoperability, and common education. And I remember in 2009-8, when I was in Afghanistan, I met a lot of soft guys who wanted to work with the Americans out in the casualty care stations. But the Americans did not recognize the Danish education at all. So there were problems getting on board, helping out. So the whole idea was that we made an NSOCM that was quite parallel to the US SOCM. There are not major differences between the educations at all. And that really helped out. And when we talk about Syria, there were a lot of NATO SOCMs working together with the Americans. A lot of different NATO countries worked together in the field hospitals or the CCPs, and they could work together because they had this common education. So in that manner of speaking, this has been a great success.
So the idea was everyone to have a SOCM training, SOCM background for interoperability. So what happened? Why has there been a massive split within all of these countries?
Well, what we have in Europe, we have 27 NATO countries, probably wrong. I think it's 31 NATO countries right now, all with their own national rules. And I can say it's been an uphill struggle with for example, blood products. The Nordics already from the beginning were working with walking blood banks, cold stored blood, you name it, warm, fresh blood. But the Italians, the medics were not even allowed to place venplants because of national rules. And this changed, of course, because pressure from the soft commanders, from the medical leaders, was quite strong in different nations. And slowly but surely, even the Italians now are making special rules for soft medics to use blood products, to just give injections, to give medicines, for example. We can say in the beginning, for example, the Dutch and the Danes and the Belgians were in a NATO response force a couple of years ago. The Danes were allowed to use blood, give medicines. The docs were allowed to go out with the guys on mobility missions. But if the Dutch went out, they always had to have an ambulance with nurses and doctors with the convoy, which of course hindered long-range missions, of course. And the problem was the nurses were not educated to the same level as an NSOC, believe it or not.
Wow.
So there were major differences in national rules, organizations, etc., that have hampered a smooth development throughout NATO. Well, that's life, and that's what we work with, trying to change. Yeah.
So there's hope as you have put out what is the standard, And there's hope that these countries are reaching that if as fast as they can.
There was an organizational block because both Norway and Sweden pulled out of the cooperation and wanted to do their own thing. So Finland and Denmark had to have a look around, and they have now started cooperating with Holland, with the Netherlands, with Switzerland, and with Ireland.
So this is what each of the individual countries need to do to be able to support their SOCMs, their soft element, to have hands-on training, to have one of the NSOCM programs to meet the standard.
And as I said, most countries are now getting there. Even SAS, England are changing their education a little bit to conform to the standards of the Directive 75001, which is great, really great. There's really a movement forward here. So if you take an Irish Ranger, a Danish Jaeger, a Finnish soft guy, and put them in the same tent, they would be able to do PCC or TCCC, whatever you want, have the same understanding of drugs and of process, have the same understanding of operational planning, medical operational planning. And that was the whole idea. And it took around these 14 years, which is okay.
It's taken us 14 years to get here. So PAC, what is the future of the NSOC? Where do you see this in 10 more years?
Oh, it depends, isn't it? If we didn't have the Ukraine war, we would probably be going into a Walker's dip right now. And the Walker's dip is where everything slows down. And I don't know if there would be funding for these programs. I probably think there would be pressure to shorten the programs for the medic in the patrol and maybe increase education for professionals. A paramedic who joins the forces. This is something one must understand. If we take the Canadians have a shooter who has an education as a medic, a shorter, much shorter education. And then they have a paramedic who receives education as a shooter. They are called NSOCs, NATO Special Operation Medical Technicians. So maybe we'll be seeing a movement away from the shooter having a 22-week education to maybe a shorter education and then developing the NSOC program in NATO. But if we take small countries like Denmark, small countries like Holland and Belgium, you name them, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, there won't be enough funding for both. And we have to have shooters, we have to have operators working in small teams, 10, 12 guys, who have a clear understanding, a good understanding, and high capabilities. So this is going to be a problem the next 10 years, I think.
The Americans have come up with a 4-week SOFAC course, which is basically a remote EMT, and they're putting all the shooters through a 4-week course to allow them to at least cannulate with venflons and do basic EMT level stuff. And that's profoundly dumbing down what you've created with NSOCM. But do you see us here in Europe doing the same thing?
It's a difficult question, Aebhric. It's all a question about budgeting. It's all a question about what the operational leaders of the different SOF units want to delve out the money. I think personally that when we have a small team of 8 guys like we have in Denmark, without any basic medical support on SR missions, on maybe direct action, you would have a doc or a senior medic or a NSOC on the platform or with a ground force commander, but you would still have a team out by themselves. And there's at least one of these team members who has to have a proficiency level of an NSOCM. I don't see that changing. But if he's an NSOCM or if he's an NSOC with specialized shooter training, He'll never be an operator, but he would be able to follow the team. Maybe smaller countries will adapt that. Larger countries like for example, KSK, they also have operator medics, and then they have NSOCs. The question is, if we have a team going out of only 8-10 guys, are we going to take a non-operator medic with us, or do we want to have our medic being a part of the operation team? Do we need him to be a shooter? And that's way out of my league. I wouldn't be able to make that decision.
Well, let me ask you this. Green Berets, you know very well, the 18 Delta is a year-and-a-half program, and every team's supposed to have 2. I've never been on a team with 2, but why is it that we're the only ones in Special Forces to do this, to have a dedicated shooter who is also a medic, a dedicated medic who can also shoot? Why has no one else been able to follow what we've done in the Green Berets?
Interesting question. Remember, an 18 Delta is not necessarily a professional medical provider. He has been a shooter all the way through, and then he gets extra education. He goes through the NSOCM, which is a 36-week, and then he does the 18 Delta course, which is a 8-week or something like that.
Trauma block, yeah.
So, and then he does his recertification, but he's still a shooter. And that's in principle the same thing that we are using in Europe right now with the NSOCMs. They have just got, of course, a much lesser education than the 18 Delta. They don't always have 2 18 Deltas with them.
Seldom do.
So they probably have a SOCOM with them, or someone who's proficient at that level. And again, if I'm looking at it, it's a little bit like, well, I think the states have had a good budget for their medical training of their operators. Let's say it that way. And the Green Berets historically have been doing missions far away from medical support, from medical advisory support. The Europeans haven't really done that. So maybe culturally it hasn't been necessary to develop medical capabilities to the same extent. Gynecology, pediatrics, what else do the 18 Deltas are proficient in? Veterinary medicine.
Animal husbandry, yeah.
Well, you know better than me, Aebhric.
Oh, no, I was an 18 Echo. I was not an 18 Delta.
Oh, I thought you were in a Delta. Okay.
Nope. I went to as a combo guy. So, PAC, you're also a medical director for Safe Nordic that does NSOCM research and surgical courses. Tell us about Safe Nordic.
Well, Safe Nordic was started as an austere medical providing organization, not necessarily soft. It was started by a prior operator, Thomas Trust Have, and he's now a specialized anesthetist and running this company. Then we identified a problem in Europe right now that there are not enough possibilities or flexible possibilities to recertify the different nations' NSOCMs. ISTC has offered seats once a year, and the Nordics have seats once a year at a specific date and specific time. Thomas and I, we thought that this would be a possibility for a civilian company with a soft background and complete knowledge of the 75001 to design a recertification course. The lucky thing was that NSHQ, way back in 2016, developed this course. And actually, I developed it in months and ran the first course in 2016, having it validated both by NSHQ, but also by the US and the Canadians. And everyone was happy. So what we did in the Safe Nordic, we took this course, developed it a little bit. We have a little bit more tactical PCC. We have live tissue. We run blood protocols like so many others do. So we offer that 4 times a year, or twice a year. And then we have developed a surgical skills course. Many of our medics do have minor surgical skills during their basic education, but really don't train it very much. So it's a 4-day course, for example, where we we go through surgical skills on moulage dolls, and then we have live tissue in a laboratory, and then we run a 24-hour tactical live tissue exercise.
Nice.
Yeah, and that's I think something we need in NATO. We don't have enough of that. So we'll see what happens. We've just started out. We ran our first research course in the spring with the Swiss, which was a good success. And other different units are interested next year. The whole idea is we would like the course to be validated also by JMED's SOFCOM or the SOFMEP. And a process is put in place now where we can apply to get NATO accreditation for these 2 courses. So what is happening right now in Europe, the military is opening doors for more civilian military cooperation, just like you have in the States.
Definitely needed. Well, PAC, we also met on Exercise Balder in Denmark. Tell us about Exercise Balder.
Actually, Balder, I was just the NSHQ representative or the SOFCOM, JMED SOFCOM representative looking at this course. It was run by the Jägerkorps in Denmark, and it was run as a follow-up to the old Swedish remedy, which many of us remember, which was a very extensive soft medical exercise. Unfortunately, the Swedes had to shut it down, and so the Jägerkorps decided to make something very much like it. It's a very tactical course with some basic medical refreshing, but very tactical. And what I saw, I thought it was a fantastic, great course.
I agree.
Yeah, I think there were around 20 students in all.
Yeah.
So
from a bunch of different countries.
There are a bunch of different countries. Very many of them were NSOCMs already, or NSOCM equivalent, and work very well together, as I said.
And they stocked the place with fantastic pints.
I don't remember much of that, Aebhric. I don't drink alcohol.
Fair enough.
Maybe some wine, but that's not really alcohol, is it?
No, not really. Not really at all. So, PAC, my final question for you is this. What advice do you have for the new medic, the new nurse, new doc, who is just starting out on their career in austere medicine?
Yeah, it's a very good question. You know, Aebhric, back in 1986, as a young anesthetist, I was in Pakistan, up in Peshawar, working for the International Committee Red Cross in a Afghan war-wounded hospital in Peshawar. And I wrote an article about this in JSOM a couple of years back. It was called Medicine on the Edge of Darkness. And I ended the article by writing, remember, when you work austere medicine, you have to be prepared that nothing works like it does back in your home hospital. You have to be prepared to improvise. You have to be prepared to accept a lower level of care than you would meet in an American or European hospital. And that is actually quite some heavy preparation, because these young guys, young people, they come out into environments where nothing is as it seems. Most of them will probably very quickly adapt. But the first period they're working there was severely wounded, where people die between their fingers, that people who shouldn't die, people who get seriously ill with diseases that are very easily treated. They have to adapt and recognize that this is where they're going. So I could, of course, elaborate more, but that was my major point.
Very good advice. PAC, it's been fantastic to have you on the podcast. You are a pillar of the austere medicine community, and I am honored to have met you and known you and worked with you, and I look forward to seeing what you continue to do for this community.
Thank you, Aebhric. And it's really been enjoyable for me. When you leave when you leave the service, it's a heavy decision to stop. I stopped when I was 61. And, I was still a young guy up in my head, but the body wasn't really young anymore. But what you realize is you really miss your comrades. And meeting you time and time again is really delightful for me.
This has been a presentation from the College of Remote and Offshore Medicine. If you would like to earn CPD credits for this podcast, you can join the Council of Members. Being a member of the college gives you free CPD credit, free access to our virtual field guide, and discounts on our e-learning courses. You can join the team on our college website at quorum.edu.mt.